The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows. Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of The Breakfast Club, where we will discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings, yes, there are some, in this movie from the 1980s. And joining me today on the panel are Father Chip Hines. Hi, Father Chip.
Hey, Dom. How you doing?
Very well, thanks. Shelly Kelly. Hi, Shelly.
Howdy.
And Andrew Hermiz. Hi, Andrew.
Hello, hello.
Just to kind of place things here, three of us lived through the 80s. We were teens probably somewhere in the 80s, and one of us wasn't. So we're going to get some different perspective, and we'll let you guess who is and who isn't in that group. But
just count me in. I was a high school senior when this movie came out.
That's right. So yeah, me too. So but we'll get to it. Before we do that, I want to remind folks to like The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows on our Facebook page, facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. Retweet us on Twitter, where we're at SQPN, and leave comments there. We love to hear from you and hear your feedback, and we love to get your comments and feedback on social media. All right, so let's talk about this John Hughes movie. So John Hughes, the screenwriter, director, made a bunch of big movies in the 80s, and then kind of petered out a bit as time went on. But let me just name the big ones. So 1984, 16 Candles. 1985, The Breakfast Club, which is what this one was. Also 1985, Weird Science. Pretty in Pink in 1986. Ferris Bueller's Day Off was in 1986. Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, 1987. Things began to peter off a bit. They had a couple of movies that weren't so big. She's Having a Baby. I don't even remember that one. That's
I saw it. It was okay.
Yes,
I loved that one.
Okay, I never saw it. Was that Ali Sheedy too?
I don't remember.
Well, Uncle Buck.
Elizabeth McGovern, yeah.
Oh, right. Uncle Buck, John Candy.
Uncle Buck. Awesome.
Uncle Buck, so good.
That's one of my favorites.
Love
Christmas Vacation, 1989. Yep. Home Alone, 1990. And then that was about it. I mean, he had others that he did after that, 101 Dalmatians and
Beethoven, I think, didn't he?
I don't remember.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he did Beethoven.
Yes, he did a few others. I'm looking at the ones that Roger Ebert reviewed, and that was not among them.
He did it under a nom de plume.
Okay. Oh, okay. That was interesting. So, but that heart of he also did Mr. Mom before that, by the way, which is I was a little surprised by. But he wrote the screenplay for Mr. Mom,
a great movie,
which is a great movie. But
yes,
that heart of that is 16 Candles to say Ferris Bueller. Those movies.
What a run!
I know.
Within 2 years, he had 5 great American teen movies, and
he was on a roll.
He was,
and he churned them out like 2 a year, nonstop.
Exactly. Like he wrote and directed several of them in the same year. I'm not sure that's even possible these days with the movies the way they make them. But Roger Ebert said, he kind of pointed out why this movie worked, why John Hughes's teen movies worked in general. He created teens who seemed plausible to teenagers. And that's something that I remember was watching this movie, and now watching it again, it was from a perspective of a 50-something-year-old is very different. But watching it then, it was like seeing an eye into the world I lived in. Not exactly. I mean, it's Hollywoodized, but they seemed plausible. They seemed like people I knew and with problems that I was familiar with. How about you guys? For those of you who lived through the 80s, but also Andrew, from your perspective as someone who's younger, like, do these seem like plausible archetypes of teens from your memory or from what you know today?
Well, I would say when I rewatched it, as well, because I hadn't watched it in a long time, and I wanted to make sure that I caught some of the nuances that I maybe have missed over the left my brain over the years. But I will say I thought the characters struck very real. I felt like I I mean, well, maybe the Ali Sheedy character didn't strike me quite as real, but I mean, there were people like her, but not quite that dramatically bastardy, I guess, of Casey, if that's the word. And she I liked her in this, but that character was probably the one that struck the least real for me. I knew Bender, I knew the nerd, I knew the jock, I knew those guys, and the princess. I mean, you knew them. They were there. They were. I mean, I could give you names, but I won't.
Father
to
Chip,
protect the innocent.
Father Chip, where were you in that list?
I'm the guy that fits in with all those people.
We all think that, right? We all thought you were that guy. I was the brain nerd.
I was that guy.
I was the nerd. Yeah, but
maybe I was the nerd then.
How about you, Shelly? How does this strike you from your perspective from when you were a teen, but also today?
Oh, it brought back a lot of memories. Do you remember, like you, Dom, that when I watched 16 Candles, when I watched this, aside from some of the Hollywoodized parts of the plot or some of the language, I wasn't in a group that used that kind of language and a lot of the sexual references either. But I knew all those people. And I don't even have to tell you, I was watching this last night with my husband, and there's a scene where Brian says, actually, there's additional exits on the backs and the sides. And my husband looked, he says, you know, that's you, right? And yes, so I really do identify with Brian. And as to Father Chip, what you were saying about Ali Sheedy's character, Allison, I did know girls that were a little bit like that. And I identified with her from the standpoint of I'm invisible. Mm-hmm. And nobody sees me.
Right. Yeah, I think that is, the important part of what she's there to show, right? I mean, that's her character's point in the movie. And but I agree with you, Shelly. I did know people like that, but not so Hollywood like that. She was a little over the top. Like she just
He turned it up a little bit to make a point.
She was turned up to 11. Yeah,
I think everybody, all the characters were like
Judd Nelson, especially.
Yeah, they were turned up to 11 on all of their personalities to emphasize them, but not to a point that made them unrealistic, but just a little more than normal. Andrew, what's your perspective on the characters?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, to age myself, I graduated high school in 2005. Sorry for making you guys maybe feel your age a little bit, but I mean, this is a movie that I've watched many times, and sure, my high school experience was a lot different. I mean, I think, you had we had our own stereotypes, we had our own, we had the jocks, we had the nerds, and all that. They were just a little different, to put it plainly. But I think the thing I related to the most is how, is one of the themes of the film, which the film has many, is just, friendship and how do friendships form, how do relationships form. And that's something that I related to a lot because, throughout high school and I would say even throughout college, you find yourself, I mean, at least in my own experience, being friends with people from all sorts of different groups. And sure, you probably, you cling on to your inner circle, for the most part, but there are unique ways that you connect with people that you, maybe you look back or maybe from the onset, you think oh, I'd never be friends with, someone like this. But, things like spending, I didn't really have the tension when I went to high school, but, experiencing, being stuck in a room basically with any type of person for any, for a prolonged amount of time, where it forces you to, to have to talk or do something that, naturally, bonds can form. And yeah, I knew some version of each of this character and as I grew up, but yeah, it's a movie that I go back to a lot and is probably the best, I would say the best 80s movie, overall, if I had to make a list. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of funny because when I read a bunch of the reviews from that era, and they were not as kind to it.
No.
And in fact, most of them, a variety, hated it, but most of them kind of thought it was, it was okay, but not as good as 16 Candles, which was the year, came out the year before, which I think is an interesting comparison. One of the things that you said about like them being, stuck in a room, it's almost like a road movie that doesn't go anywhere. It's where they're put in a stressful situation that brings out aspects of their personality and brings them together. And I think that's one of the things that makes it so interesting. Or I think someone else pointed out, it's like I think it was the Ebert review that mentions it's a lot like a Eugene O'Neill play. That it's like a stage play almost because of the limited. I mean, it's filmed in mostly one room, but also just one building, a high school. And that small world, but it's a universe. When you're a teenager, that's your universe.
Well, it's funny you said road trip, Don. I didn't catch the road trip aspect, but as I was watching it, I kept thinking this seems familiar. And when I finally put my finger on it, it was a retreat.
Right.
It is like a retreat. It's twisted. It's not necessarily spiritual, but the elements are all in there, and the scent is in there. And I mean, outline check.
Right. Well, it's funny because when I was friends in high school with jocks and with the weirdos, the guys who would be self-professed weirdos, but that was through CYO, the youth group. We called it CYO at the time, but it would have been the youth group of my parish, and on retreats and ski trips and that sort of stuff. And it was those experiences that brought us together across the boundaries, which we wouldn't have necessarily been friends if we just knew each other through classes and school. It was those outside experiences that brought us together that really formed those bonds.
Yeah, it's kind of set up as like a war movie. It's they're like down in the trenches together.
And you got the guy from Brooklyn and the guy from the farm in Kansas. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it's very much set up that way. And Bender is like the guy who makes the sacrifice, play and for the team.
Right.
And I think that's obviously what John Hughes was going for. He kind of took that concept, and it also reminds me of like, it's funny you mentioned like youth groups, like going on retreats, and meeting a lot of new people, like growing up in my youth group, going on like certain retreats where we would have people that were non-church goers, trying to reconnect with their faith. So it'd be a lot of people that I wasn't close with or really even knew. And then you spend a weekend together, and then you come out, lifelong friends.
Yep. Trading emails and
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So again, it's that going back to like, you put a bunch of people in a room in a setting like that, and where they're kind of forced to interact with their own devices, and interesting things come out of it.
It's interesting that thinking about that, because it's very much a product of its time. If this were set in 2020, it would be very different with the world of social media, with emails, and they'd have their phones on them, and there would be all these different ways that they would interact. It would be very different. Bender wouldn't be able to destroy the card catalog, which horrified me as a former library employee. But it would be a very different kind of movie because of the different world we live in today. And I thought that was very interesting.
Couldn't make that movie today because those people, that way of life is gone. I mean, it's just gone. And now people are different. I don't even know. As I was watching it, I remember thinking to myself, do they even have these kinds of stereotypes anymore? I mean, are these stereotypes even like real anymore? I mean, because my interaction with kids since, I was an adult has been through being a priest. And I don't see those kids. I see jocks, obviously, and but they all mix together. They don't have, it doesn't feel like they have these cliques anymore. I'm sure they're there, but
yes.
But it feels like there's boundaries that are gone that used to be up when we were kids.
Different kinds of boundaries, maybe.
Yeah.
Different kinds of.
Yeah. I mean, different like social boundaries and different things like that. Because I honestly, first things first, my high school didn't have a Saturday detention. We had detention. It was after school. You spent an hour in the classroom and that was it.
Or you were suspended.
Yeah. You could get suspended for sure. They even had in-school suspension.
Yeah.
That was the stupidest thing I ever. Yeah. So yeah, you're there in school and you can't go to your classes. Yeah. It's like, come on, man.
I'm smiling that both of you know this.
I have no idea. I will deny all knowledge of.
Yes, me too. But I will say, I loved this. I loved this movie when I was a kid. I love it now. I even rewatching it, and the other thing I loved was he made this movie for $1 million.
Yes.
$1 million.
He wrote it in 2 days.
Right.
Who does that?
The guy's
he was a genius.
Yeah.
He really was.
Yeah. His later work notwithstanding, I mean, this period of movie making was probably some of the most prolific movie making of our time.
People still quote Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Oh, yeah.
That movie came out in 1986.
Save Ferris.
Yeah. It's on T-shirts still. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I've gone from being Ferris to being Art Rooney, but that's.
I think we all have, Dom. Yeah. Except maybe Andrew.
I have a 9-year-old who has just spent the entire Christmas break watching Home Alone and can quote the entire movie.
There you go.
Nice.
Home Alone. I watched it with my kids. You know, I want to mention the movie starts with on screen this David Bowie quote from this song Changes. It's not a subtle. This is what this movie is about. You know, this is what John Hughes says this movie's about. It's the quote is, and these children that you spit on as they try to change their worlds are immune to their consultations. They're quite aware of what they're going through. So Hughes's thesis here is to look from the perspective of teens, and we see this several times throughout. They feel like the adults in their lives don't understand them. You know, as a parent of teens now, it's kind of funny, but because I understand a whole lot more than you think I do. But the adults in these teens' lives don't understand them, and that they're afraid of the future. You know, what is am I destined to become these adults? You know, because all of these kids, their parents aren't all that nice to them. You know, whether it's
that's true.
Andy's dad, who's the jock dad. Who, you know, and then I got to remember the names because I only remember the actors. Claire's parents who are using her as a tool in their eventual divorce, and Brian's parents who only care about his grades, and poor Allison, whose parents just don't even acknowledge her existence, and Bender, whose dad is an abusive jerk. You know, so none of them are, and then the principal who just is obviously a jerk. And it's like they have no adults in their lives from the perspective of the movie that they can connect with, who they understand.
The principal, I want to make one comment because I thought it was hysterical when he said it. He says, I make $30,000 a year. I'm like, $30,000? And he's acting like that's a lot of money. Yeah. You know?
Well, in 1985, maybe $30,000 was a pretty good living. I don't know.
I make $30,000 a year. But I thought his character was probably the least fleshed out, right? I mean, on purpose. I don't think John Hughes liked adult characters in these movies. I think he purposely tried to make the adults look clueless and the children look smart. And I think that's an important thing to remember about his style and about just the way he was. The children were always smart. I mean, Home Alone, the kid's a criminal mastermind, for crying out loud.
Right. All the parents in Home Alone are bad. All the adults in Home Alone are
awful parents, except
for the old man in the church. But everyone else is pretty much a bad person,
right? Exactly,
or bad at what they do.
Yeah, and Uncle Buck was like probably the first time he made an adult that you really liked, but he was just like a kid. He was an overgrown kid.
that's why he was a good person.
That's right. And even his girlfriend in that movie, which, it's funny how all these fat guys have these great looking girlfriends in television movies. But anyway, so he has this great looking girlfriend that he somehow or another can't commit to. It's
right. It's a fantasy world. It's a kid's fantasy world.
It is.
Right.
All of the movies are kind of like that. They're kind of kids' fantasy worlds.
But Uncle Buck is about Uncle Buck. It's about an adult growing up and moving on to another stage of life. Whereas here, he's focused on these teenagers. And I don't remember being shocked or overly wowed by Bender. No, Vernon. Sorry, the assistant principal is Vernon. But as I'm rewatching this, he's a bully.
Oh,
he is just as abusive to these kids. And I'm sitting and thinking, I was not the girl who got in trouble in high school, so I don't know. I'd never went to the assistant principal's office, but they didn't talk to kids in the 80s like that. I hope they didn't throw things around or shove them or say such hateful things to their faces. Now, maybe it's just because I've been raising teens now and been in the high schools now, and everything is now we're going to do this in a very special way. But it was particularly harsh for me now, 30 something years removed from that time period, to look back and say, I know it's just a movie and they are overhyping or over amplifying it to make the point go home and make you identify with it. But was it really like that? And I was talking with my sister today and she said, yeah, it was. And we just really struggled with it a little bit.
There was, if you were a kid like Bender, yes.
Yes.
I mean, I don't want to call it guys 30 years later, but there were guys, teachers or administrators in my high school who would have been, I never experienced it, but I knew that they were like this toward the guys who were the regular screw ups. So,
right.
Not to threatening to beat him to a pulp, but mean to them because I know you're a loser and you're always going to be a loser and you're a pain to me.
Verbally abusive.
Yeah. Emotionally abusive, which came out in this. I mean, you could see in Bender's face when it was just him and Werner alone in that supply closet, how scared he was. That he in that moment, he had gone from being this semi-adult to a kid. I mean, great acting by Judd Nelson in that. Scene.
Yeah.
In all my previous seeings of this movie, I don't remember really connecting with Judd Nelson's character, Bender, in here. But rewatching it, I was drawn to exactly that. Mm-hmm. How he would go from tough guy putting up a front to scared, abused teenager who has no future and knows it.
Right.
Yeah. Just what I think is a central theme of the movie is and why I think all the adults and everyone that works at the school is perceived as a bully or a jerk, is like it's how education is, can sometimes oppress the soul. And when it's really meant to form it, it's not to get too philosophical, but it's a very Nietzsche, sort of thing where he argues and one of the few things we can agree with Nietzsche on is that education is supposed to form the soul. And a lot of times, schools, again, maybe back then, maybe not so much more now. I mean, the education system oppresses the soul in different ways now, I guess. But like how the movie portrays it is that, these figures who are supposed to be, if not idols, at least role models to these children, if not father figures and mother figures. But, a lot of times they tend to be, especially to people like Bender, they oppress them and pin them down even more. And they obviously, they even though they play the stereotypes, again, like the Brian's letter at the end of the movie, where he says, we're not like what you just see on the surface. We're not just the jock and the nerd and, the pretty girl and so on. So, yeah, I think that's a big reason why, again, I think John Hughes chose to portray all the adults as jerks and showing how these teenagers are trying to make it in a world that's so harsh around them, and it's already difficult enough at that age with everything going on with them physically and mentally. that the adults around them don't make it any easier.
You know, it's an interesting point, that letter. I wanted to mention that because they read it at the beginning and at the end, and it's this essay that they were told to write on who do you think you are, which, you know, what Werner thinks of it as, you know, he probably read it in some, you know, teaching discipline manual or somewhere, like, oh, what a great idea, I'm going to do this. But they take it, and it's interesting because this is what it says, you know, who do you think we are? What do you care? You see us as you want to see us, in the simplest terms, in the most convenient definitions. And then, you know, and they describe themselves, that's how we saw ourselves this morning. You know, a brain, an athlete, a basket case, a princess, a criminal. That's how we saw ourselves this morning. We were brainwashed. And I think the idea is these aren't definitions they come up with for themselves. It's definitions that are in some ways imposed by the adults around them. That pigeonhole the kids. Oh, you're going to be a brain. You know, you're a smart kid. I want you to get A's. Oh, you're good physically. You're going to be an athlete. Or I was an athlete and you're going to be an athlete. Or you come from wealth, therefore you're going to be among the, you know, the rich kids or the princess of the school, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's the idea. And there's some validity to that sometimes, as you said, Andrew, we oppress the soul, or education becomes indoctrination, and we sort of warehouse these kids in these schools rather than help them to, you know, discover who they are from inside. Instead, we impose models on them from outside. And I think that's an interesting exploration that this movie does in the midst of, you know, pot jokes and making sex cracks and that sort of thing.
Dom, did you notice that they do begin with it and end with it, but it's different?
Yes. It is slightly different at the end.
Right. At the very end, he says, what we found out is that each of us is a brain, an athlete, a basket case, a princess, and a criminal. So what they came to discover was that they were more alike than they were the definition of that stereotype.
Right. Right.
So, and as you were talking, I had in my mind that even these stereotypes are used in Disney movies today with a High School Musical. It's, you know, the jocks and the theaters and the nerds so these stereotypes do exist. They might evolve and change and have a flow, an ebb and flow to them. But that's one of the things I liked about the movie was how they came together as individuals in their own social group stereotype. And by the end, they had discovered they had more in common as human beings than they did as being defined by how they presented in school or by their parents.
And their concern for what others think. That's a huge element in it, is their concern. Or Bender pretends to not be concerned what other people think of him, but is ultimately just as concerned. He's ultimately creating as much of a mask as the others. Although, you know, he is a really great antagonist because he's an agent of chaos in there that really stirs things up. If Bender hadn't been in detention with them, they would have come, they would have sat, they would have left 8 hours later, and nothing would have changed. But Bender is an agent of chaos who himself gets changed, but he's the reason so much gets stirred up and changed. And it's very interesting that this bad kid is the one that really pulls them all out of themselves and gets them to look inside a bit. So it's very interesting there.
Well, don't you think he knew something of that? Like, he could see that. I agree with you. He's an agent of chaos because he could kind of see each one of them as what they were, so to speak. And I put that in air quotes. And that he would poke them, each one of them, with something. You know, and he would just keep on poking. And he especially poked at Claire. You know, he was really going after her, and he was, you know, you could argue he was really being mean to her. And I think he was. But I think he was coming from he's coming from such a place of hurt and misunderstanding. And I think it was Shelly that you said he's got he's got a mask. He's got his mask on, and they all do, really, but his mask is so much more visible. Like, you can, as an adult, you can see it. You know, you see it. The other kids, you could see those kids in a high school hall, and you would think, oh, they're well adjusted and normal. But underneath, they're not, right? You know, underneath they have all the pain and the angst and the you know, whatever of being a high school student. And you know, I think things have changed a little bit since then. You know, with the educational system, I think it's worse now.
In some ways.
In some ways. And I think, you know, my high school principal was a former Marine. He didn't take any guff from anybody. And I saw him dress down kids in the hallway, you know, like in front of us, which would probably never happen today. But, you know, but he didn't take any nonsense, and everybody knew it. And so, you know, there was a lot of, you know, being good, because Mr. Orlando was going to get you if you didn't, you know, and that was the thing.
That's a key
difference.
He was
a great guy.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say there's a key difference. The parents we do see, none of them say you shouldn't be here. Like, you don't deserve to get your punishment. You know, they're all kind of disappointed that you did something or got caught, like
Right.
Andy's dad. But today, I think you might see more often, at least I've heard, my kids are homeschooled, so I don't have to experience this, but you might see parents going in and saying my child is innocent or my child doesn't deserve to be punished.
Right. Happens all the time.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a difference there. There is more awareness of bullying.
Yes.
I mean, there were plenty of moments in this movie where I cringed. I cringed at language. I cringed at some of the stuff they talk about, the sexual things, the drug use, which is, you know, that was not all. There was plenty of this that wasn't realistic, which is like them getting away with smoking pot in the library as if Werner would never smell it. I mean, come on. But
yeah, that was funny.
But there were things in this where I kind of cringed at like, oh, like this would, and realizing, wow, things have changed. Like the stuff that was acceptable then. I kind of want to talk about how the movement of the plot or of the situation of the characters from the beginning to the end. And, you know, so the beginning is all trepidation as they arrive. They don't know what they're going to experience, except for Bender, because he's obviously done this plenty of times. There's this moment of an antagonism as they're asserting their space. Bender's power is, you know, and between him and Andy as the alphas of and then poor Brian, you know, kind of tries to be the peacemaker and gets pushed off. But around like lunchtime, yeah, you start to see these cracks in the walls between them, like the whistling thing, you know, the POW movie whistling.
Bridge over the River Kwai?
Right.
Yeah.
Which is a very interesting a reference there that, you know, prisoners of war. There's some unity in that. You have lunch, which really shows the differences between them all, right? Bender couldn't be bothered to bring a lunch. Claire has sushi, which in 1985 was as exotic as you could possibly be.
I'd never heard of it in 1985.
Right.
I never heard of it, never had it, didn't want
it. in Illinois, no less. I mean, California, maybe they'd be doing like having sushi in 1985, but not in Illinois. Then
she was rich.
Yeah, exactly. Showing her that difference. Then you have Andy's like lunch that could feed a battalion. Power lunch. Gotta keep up the energy.
He's gonna bulk up.
And then Brian's got, you know, soup and a PB&J and apple juice, you know. I mean, it's just, and then I have to love Allison's, like, so she throws the olive loaf onto the statue and then pours sugar packets onto the bread, and then Captain Crunch.
Pixie sticks.
That's what I was remembering.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, the lunch of champions.
Grossed out by that.
Yeah, it was so gross.
And she really ate it too.
I know. I know.
But the key turning point is when they sneak out, you know, and then they try to avoid, you know, Werner, the principal, but they sneak out to go to Bender's locker. They don't all know why they're going. They're just like, oh, we're just going. And then it's when Bender sacrifices himself to save the others. That's the key turning point. That when everything shifts. I mean, there's still antagonism after that, but it's that moment of when they see that they're in it together, when they're willing to you know, what they're willing to do for each other against a common foe. And I think that's the big thing here. The other one was that they then cover for Bender as he's sneaking.
Yeah, that's right.
Sneaking around, and then they have this small group moment. To me, like Shelly, you said it. It was like retreat, except we didn't smoke pot on our retreats. But it was like retreat where you have this small group and you're sitting around and you're talking about stuff. You know, and where you really kind of start to reveal yourself, and you really get this interesting revelations about them. They start to reveal why they're there, how they ended up there. I mean, Claire, we find out right off the bat, she's there because she skipped school to go shopping, and that's pretty much it. You know, we never find out what Bender did, but obviously he must have done something. But we find out like what Andy did, you know, and how remorseful he is, and why. And he says, you know, he tortured this other kid because it was expected of him,
right? And
how bad he felt for that other kid, and how humiliated he must have been to go home to his dad after having been humiliated. And it was that is, I think, the emotional center of the movie for me is that moment, that empathy.
And I think it bonded him also a little bit to Brian, because Brian knew the boy.
Yes.
Right.
And so Andy wasn't just showing remorse to strangers. He was showing true remorse to someone who he had to look and see, you know, this boy, this is your friend too. And I don't know if he was feeling remorse before he came, but it was a very growing up development kind of moment for him. So, and Bender was there because he pulled the fire alarm.
Oh, right. That's right. Yeah. I knew he did something. Allison's role is peacemaker in this part of the movie. Every time things get tense or angry, she redirects and deflects into another, you know, something else. So when Bender gets really mean with Claire at this point, you know, when they're revealing her talent, you know, it's she redirects and deflects, and it's a very interesting role that she plays. And Andy recognizes what she's doing, I think, and it becomes clear. That's where I think their connection is made.
I found it interesting too that she was the only one that didn't smoke the marijuana.
No, she was weird already, so she didn't need to.
Yeah. But I think she was weird because she didn't have any attention. So she acted out in her ways to see if anyone noticed. And in fact, Bender, the first thing he says when he walks in is, "I see you around, you know." And she looks at him. But when they all go off to smoke, you know, there goes Claire, there goes Brian, like, oh, I'll never have another chance to try this again. Yeah. And then here's Andy, I've got to meet. I can't do this. I've got to meet on Saturday. And then it's like, next thing you know, he's back there. But she's the only one that just sits there like, I don't need to. This is stupid.
Right.
Yeah, she's the only one, you know, that doesn't have a clique. You know, she's the outsider.
Clique of one.
You know? Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. And I think, you know, out of all the characters, all the stereotypical characters in this movie, she's the one that has been constant throughout time. I mean, those people still exist now. And it's like the people that have, like, you know, turned their back on the world and are confined to their own, whatever their belief system is. And you know, that's why she's able to, like, call out everyone on their BS and able to connect with them in a different way, to where, you know, she's real with them and she because she can observe from the outside, and because she's not really concerned about, you know, fitting in. So she's able to have, you know, this sort of perspective. So yeah, her character to me is the most interesting one, and the one that you know, I think carries that theme of you know, like how, like I mentioned, it's whether it's the education system or, like, parents or, you know, the adults in these kids' lives, you know, oppressing them, where she's the one that, even though obviously she has her own issues, she's the one that can at least see everything, you know, clearly, you know, not in a hippie sort of sense, but in like I know how it really is in this world, man. Like I'm the one that gets it. You don't get it. You're you know, you pay attention to, like, I guess a modern day sort of thing is like someone who's just not on social media, but someone who reads books and you know, is into philosophy and stuff. And
we don't like those guys.
Really knows what's going on. Yeah, exactly.
Just kidding. You know, I think she voices that central theme, that moment, that what Hughes is getting across here, which is, you know, I think it's Andy who asks, yeah, are we going to be just like our parents? And she's the one who says it's unavoidable. When we grow up, our heart dies. And it's such a sad thing to realize that they see that the adults in their lives, their parents, that their hearts have died, that they're grown up and they've been worn down, and they're not, the love is not there. I mean, I'm sure their parents love them, but they're worn down by the cares, by whatever in life. And the teens they look forward. This is what I get to look forward to for the rest of my life is to be that sort of blah person.
Okay, but think of that today. I mean, Dom, when you were growing up, is that how you felt about your parents?
1985, my parents were getting divorced. So I didn't think of my parents as being dead inside. I just didn't understand my parents. I think that might have been it. I mean, I love my parents, and I felt like they loved me, but I didn't understand them or what they were doing or why they did what they did.
Right. And Father Chip, what about you?
No, I feel the same way. I didn't feel like my parents were dead inside or anything, but I didn't understand. And I sometimes I still don't understand some of the drive that was there. Like one of my parents was really driven. I don't want to out either one of them, was really driven that I was going to go to college. My brothers were going to go to college. We were all going to college, and that was going to be your thing. You're going to college and you're going to get a good job and you're going to have a good life. That was pushed down my throat so much. And I went to college. I ended up, of course I did, because I had to, really. I mean, there was no, I had mentioned to my parents something about taking a year off, and they were like, no, you're not taking a year off. People are taking a year off, never go back. And I'm like, okay, all right. So I went. But, there was things about growing up that I never quite understood. And I guess I understand them better now. I mean, I think my parents were trying to set me up for success, right? What they thought, as baby boomers, that what success was, and that's what they were trying to do, and everything they did was based on that, like setting us up for success. And I get it. I get the desire and the drive and the thought process, but I think some of that really hurts kids. In the long run, it can hurt kids if they don't somehow get out of that sort of spiral of, I got to do this, I got to do that, I got to do that. Life isn't about putting A and B and C and D together. It just isn't. Life is a lot messier than that.
Andrew, how about you?
Yeah, for me, I a little similar to what Father Chip was saying is like, yeah, my parents, I never, thought of them as dead inside, but yeah, they wanted what was best for me. And again, they thought it was like, oh, we got to go to college, get a good education, and me in high school, it's like the typical, like, oh, my parents don't get it. Like, they're not cool. They're
right.
Like, and when I'm their age, I'm not going to be like them, like I'm going to do things differently. Right. So yeah, I'm especially being a first generation American born in my family. It's like, oh, well, they weren't born in this country, so they're stuck in their old ways, a little bit. So, that sort of typical mindset. And yeah, I can see now being older and, having a child of my own, I can see like, oh, wow, like obviously I have moments of like, well, my parents did this right. And then I can also look back. It's also like, yeah, there are times where, like Father Chip was saying, it can be hard on kids if you're, if you're whatever pushing one sort of thing on them too much. Whether it's, I mean, my daughter's 2. We're not talking about college yet, but it's stuff that yeah, exactly. We're taking it one step at a time. But I think the thing that I relate to the movie the most is like not necessarily looking at my parents in that sort of negative way. I never really did, but it never really got too far past like, oh, my parents aren't cool. But it's that sense of like when I was in high school, it's like you always felt like you had to be a part of one of these social groups, in school. Like you had to be like with the cool kids, or you were trying to be with that group or that group. And then if that group was like not cool anymore, you have to move to a different one, and then you have to be at war with other social circles and stuff like that. It's a constant. And then when you as we know now, when you get into adulthood, you're not really, that's not really a thing anymore. You're not at war with.
It seems so important when you're in high school, doesn't it?
Exactly. It was your life. It's all, you lost sleep over it.
It was your life. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. It affected your schoolwork, your focus at school and stuff.
It was like being in the mafia.
Yes.
It was like being in the mafia.
It's a very good,
you had your clique, a group of people, and they were your crew. And, you probably had a capo of that crew. And, and it was like being in the mafia. You had to be careful about what you said to certain people, and you couldn't, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Where did you go to school?
I was the Joe Pesci in my group.
Where did you go to school?
Oh man!
Did you go to school in some mythical place?
Boston's a little different from Texas. Let's just say maybe things are a little different where you and I grew up, Father Chip. Well, Shelly, how about you? For you, how did this strike you? This mindset.
Probably the closest parent that I would have identified with there was Brian's mom, who was actually played by Anthony Michael Hall's real mother. Mm-hmm. And that was his real life sister. But when she's like, this is the first and the last time. Yes. He's like, yes. And I don't know. Did she know why he was there? And I'm guessing not, because I read they ad-libbed all of those scenes around there. But I would think that if they had called and said my son had brought a flare gun to school and it went off in his locker, that there'd have been a conversation a little more in depth than why did you have a flare gun in your school? Yes, I think I felt the pressure of the grades from my parents, but at no time did I think that they put getting grades over how they felt about me or my sister and brother. They were demanding in that they had high expectations, and going to college was never even a conversation. It was, you will, because it will set you up to be able to choose that path in your life, and we are able to help you go there. But I mean, it wasn't perfect. I'm not trying to say that hindsight now is that they were loving, perfect parents. They had their own issues, but nothing like what you saw in these characters in this movie. And I didn't know anyone with those parents. I knew friends who had parents that maybe might have touched in a few of those stereotypes, and watching Andy with his dad, my husband and I are sitting on the couch. We have a daughter and a son who are very competitive in sports. One is playing in college right now. And he was so careful when the older one was in high school every year. Do you still love playing? Is this still something you want to do? I don't want you to play this sport because I want you to play this sport. And so I'd like to think that maybe we've come that far in these 30 plus years, but maybe that's just our family and how we were raised.
I think it's just your family and many families like you. What I mean is I knew like kids whose dads were like Andy's, and I've still encountered them every once in a while who are sports is
every
everything.
Once in a while.
Yeah. This is your ticket. You're not going to get anywhere without it. You don't screw it up. And there was sometimes that, I mean, I don't remember feeling the pressure of if you've got to get good grades or you're not going to succeed in life. But there was my dad was a blue collar worker, and he just wanted for all of us to be able to do the best we could in life. That was his generation. And so he's the pre-boomer generation. I guess he was too young. He wasn't old enough to go to fight in World War II. He fought in Korea, so I'm not sure what generation that makes him. His mindset was every generation does better than the one before. That was a mindset. That was his parents' mindset. That was his mindset, and that's been a thing. And I don't know that that's the same anymore. I don't think people expect you're going. My kids are going to be better, and by better, usually. Socioeconomically, better than we are. I don't think it's the same level of expectation that there was. I mean, there's still people out there who like you're going to be a doctor or you're going to be a lawyer. You're going to be some really high. There's still kids out there who hear that, and then I think it's just a shame because their value is placed in what they can go to college for and how much they can earn. One of the things I think is the sign is kids want to be kids for a while, and so much of life, and I see it all, sometimes online, and people I know or people I read about, they spend their kids' childhood worrying about their adulthood instead of letting their kids live their childhood. And I mean, you got to prepare, of course, but there's also, you can kind of kill the spark in them if it's all work and no play. And I think there's a little of that in here, that message a bit.
Well, especially for, was it Andy? His thing was, it was wrestling, and that was it. And, that was so clear in his character. I think with Brian, it was, okay, yeah, he's got to get good grades, but there was I didn't get a sense that he was being, shoved into one profession or another. I think it was just get good grades, go to college, and figure out what you're going to do with your life, But I think that this is probably, in our time now, is probably the first time in American history where parents don't expect their kids to be better off than they were. I think this is an unusual time that we're living in.
I'm going to disagree with you slightly. I think it's, and I'm looking at Andrew now, since you've already shared with us that you are first generation American born in your family. My family, my mother was second generation, but first one to go to college. So I'm wondering if how long you've been in the country or where your family is from still has a play in that there's still an expectation that we've come here for a better opportunity, and it takes a few generations to rise and build and grow in those mental and expectations of what you can and will achieve. And I think, wasn't it John Adams who said, I'm going to be this and a that, like an attorney and this kind of level, so that my children can become artists and dreamers and painters, so that everybody wants to work hard and create a foundation that then they can help their children grow from. And that's the American dream.
I think you see it a lot in immigrant families. I see it among the folks I know, whether it's their parents were first generation, or if, in fact, some of my peers who have kids my kids' age, who their first generation, they came here from another place, and their kids they're gonna do, those kids are doing everything. They're highly scheduled, and there's from the outside there appears to be a lot of pressure. I don't want to judge other people's families, because maybe the kids are thriving that way. So it's not necessarily just a negative, but I see that possibility that there is still some people who think my kids are going to be better off than I am. But I've seen lots of talk about how this might be the first generation, Gen Y or Gen Z or Gen X, or not Gen X, that's us.
No, we're Gen X.
Yeah, millennials or whatever might be the first generation that isn't better off than the generation before them. I don't know how much of that is just pundits talking or not, but from a human perspective, an individual perspective, that is a thing that kids experience, that kids go through, is what do my parents want of me? What am I worth to them? Am I worth just my grades? Am I worth just the things I can accomplish? I've seen, as when I've worked in youth ministry, I've seen parents who literally live through the accomplishments of their children. They're living vicariously. I've had kids tell me, my mom wants me to go out partying on the weekends because that way I'll fit in with the other kids. Yes. Yeah. I mean, this is the sort of thing
that's crazy
that some parents want to live vicariously through their kids in these ways. And the kid is like, no, I want to live I want to be a good kid. I want to be moral. I don't want to sin. And the parents are the ones that are undermining that. And that's sad.
I think it depends. It really does depend on where you are, in what town you're in. Like, I've lived in a bunch of different towns now as a priest, moving to different parishes. And one of the things I noticed in one of my former places was that there was a lot of that, party hardy kind of stuff. It was like, there's a kegger in the woods next week. And, and I'm like, oh, great. So then all of a sudden there was an abandoned airport nearby, and a young teenage girl passed out in trying to get home, and she passed out in like 3 inches of water, and she drowned.
I remember that.
And so all of a sudden, it became like there was a microscope put on this community, and it wasn't just one community; it was kind of more like 3 communities. The microscope was put on them, and it was like, well, what are we teaching our kids about, life? What are we teaching them? That they have to go out and party? Why do they have to go out and party? Some kids, they have to go out and party because they're trying to dull something inside of them. Other kids just go because everybody else is going, I'll go. And then I'm sure there are other reasons for people going. It really did give the communities an opportunity to pause and self-reflect on what exactly were we doing and where were we pushing kids. And I was sort of right stuck in the middle of it. And I remember we had a candlelight, mass. We had a mass and we had a vigil and we had all this stuff. And I like to think things changed a little bit, but I'm pretty sure that things kind of, after a few months, kind of went back to almost normal. That's just kind of the way things go, I think. Tragedies happen, people promise to change, things don't change, and then we go forward and go on. And I think each individual community is kind of different that way.
I think individuals change. I think these sorts of events can change people, but I don't think it changes necessarily society, the culture of the town or larger. Right. I want to kind of bring things to a wrap up with the movie and talk a little bit about how it ends, where I have to point out, when you mentioned the flare gun, that is another area where this movie is very much different from our day. A kid bringing a flare gun to school would not.
He'd be out.
Oh, man.
The police would be there. It would be in the news. It would have been, obviously, given all the things that have happened between 1985 and today, that would be.
He'd be gone.
Yes. But
he wouldn't be in that school anymore. Yeah.
But as it ends, what do we have? We have Brian, a new confidence, a new sense of himself, Claire and Bender, the odd couple, and then Allison and Andy, which there was that spark there. Andy had a spark for Allison right from the beginning, didn't he? Even before she had the makeup, the montage makeover. That's de rigueur for such movies. But and they go their separate ways. And I think it's still a little unresolved. This idea of on Monday at school, are they going to be friends or are they going to go back to the old ways? And maybe they will, maybe not. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Okay. We didn't talk about Claire ending up with Bender.
Right.
And that's kind of a really big part of this movie.
Okay.
Especially considering the bullying that occurred, the sexual harassment that kind of occurred when he was under the table. And it, to me, that was the most off part of the film, of all of his films. That was the most, how did that happen?
Right.
That she went and I could see her being, attracted is too strong of a word. Right. That interest in the bad boy. But after everything that they had been through that morning, and even the sharing, and when he was still, making fun of her, it felt like the biggest jar. It didn't work. And everybody's going to argue with me, but as the woman on this panel here, I don't like it.
Yeah.
And I didn't like it then. And I don't like it even more now as I watch it as a mom of college age girls. And so the idea that she crawled in there and she initiated the action with him, she kissed him. And then I remember there was all, well, what did they do in the closet? What did they do? We don't know. But then I get her giving her the earring as if to say, you are worth something. You have value, but I don't really understand the tension and the attraction after what's happened.
Yeah, it may be the least believable resolution. I mean, the idea that the princess of the school would end up with this jerk. I think he was trying to make a point, but hadn't built the enough of a foundation for it. As you say, even very late in the movie, he was still being a jerk to her. If there was more time to see that that shift. I could see that. I could see your point on that.
I think part of it is maybe, you know, John Hughes was just playing off the stereotype in films where the odd couple end up together. So I think maybe that's part of it. And like you said, maybe it's probably not the best fleshed out storyline in the film. But I think, you know, even like at the end of the movie, when he's like really, you know, railing into her, he has that line where he says, well, what do you even care? I might not even exist, you know, in this school. So, something along those lines. I think there is like, she's attracted to that vulnerability that he shows. And, you know, and whether it's maybe she started liking him out of pity a little bit, you know, for better or worse. You know, I think that might have been part of it. But yeah, it's not, like you said, it's not the most believable, you know, part. But that point that you like you said about the ending where it's like, oh, well, it's not resolved and they're going to go back to school. Are they all going to be changed out of this for the better? Are they going to go back to their old ways? You know, that reminds me of, you know, speaking of, I was talking about like going on retreats earlier. There's a retreat that the youth group that I was in, it's called the Emmaus retreat. So it's based around the Emmaus Bible passage. And one of the last sort of talks or group discussions of the retreat is called Going Back to Jerusalem. You know, is after they encounter Jesus and the Bible passage, they have to go back to Jerusalem. So and that whole talk is about like, okay, you've taken everything you've learned. You know, you've had this sort of existential moment with each other and you learned about yourselves and you've created these bonds and you haven't resolved all your problems, but you've at least grown in a way. Now you're going to go back into the real world, because the real world is not that one room where you're all together and you felt safe, you know, for a moment with each other. When you go back to the real world, you're going to encounter all those problems again, whether it's your parents and your social circles and the bullies and all that. And working in youth ministry, you know, like you encounter a lot of teens, a lot of kids where you think you know, they've grown enough to where they can be better. But then, you know, there's always like the ones that you heard like, oh, well, they went back to their old ways and you hope that they can get back up. So yeah, that's I think that's another real good message of the film, is that it doesn't have it has a happy ending, but it leaves everything not fully resolved.
I was going to say, I had no problem believing that Claire ended up with Bender, because I've seen it a million times. And, you know, and I think, Shelly, don't take this the wrong way, but I think some women look at men like that and say, I can fix him. I can make him better. Yes. I can make him better.
I've known a lot of people like that, for sure.
Yeah, I have too.
I was not raised that way.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
From my perspective,
yeah.
How often, Father Chip or Andrew, when you were younger guys, how often did you look at a really attractive, wonderful, nice girl with that absolute jerk? Like, why is she with him? You know, like, how could she possibly be with that guy?
I think there's many examples of that.
Yeah. I think guys have seen that a lot, and maybe John Hughes was playing that out in his own mind. That's the sort of thing he saw. You know, and it may not be all that true necessarily. It may not happen a lot, but he might have been playing that out, that scenario.
I can accept that premise there, Dom, that maybe he's playing it out a little heavy on the stereotype of the good girl being attracted to the bad boy. That was the one thing that really rubbed me. So
yeah,
it wasn't the lipstick trick.
No, that was stupid.
In the age of Me Too, it does come across a little bit differently now than it did back then.
Yeah. There's plenty of things in that may be uncomfortable. The idea that the kids in this story were all like, oh yeah, everyone's having sex. You know, everyone in high school's having sex. I remember talking to my buddies in high school, and and I was naive and innocent. And, talking to them and like, is everybody having sex? And he's like, dude, nobody's having sex. Like,
nobody's having sex.
Everybody's a virgin. They all just want to pretend
having sex. Right?
Everybody talked about it.
Exactly.
But when you drill down, not everybody was.
And I was a little uncomfortable with the movie's like forward presentation of it. Like, as in, like, this is just I mean, I get teenagers are full of hormones, and for a lot of teenagers, it's uppermost in the mind. And I suppose that's part of making it authentic to the teen audience that's going to the movie. But as an adult of teens now, you know, I look at it and go, yeah, that's. I'm not comfortable with that part of it. You know, that and the pot smoking, that's the other one I'm not all that comfortable with. But
you just reminded me of another detail that could never happen today. And that is in the assistant principal's office. There's a calendar on the wall with a girl in like a red swimsuit. Right. And the name of the company is Rigid.
Rigid Tools. Yeah. That it was like a Baywatch calendar or something. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yep.
No, that wouldn't happen today.
You know what I did? I can't leave without mentioning the Carl, the custodian.
Carl. And I love Carl.
Carl was great. Everyone remembers like a custodian, like Carl in school. Like there was that one cool custodian, and when Carl tells Verna the truth, like the kids haven't changed. Right. Kids are the same. And it's true. Kids are still essentially the same now in 2021 because you've changed. And I love this. You took this job because you thought it'd be easy in having summers off, And then that scene ends with Verna thinking about how these kids are going to be running the country someday. Hey, guess what, Verna? They are. We're Gen X and we're running the country now.
Well, sort of.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the old men are still running it, but we're not. We're coming up.
Yeah, the millennials are going to jump us.
They are.
I'm coming
I have
for
a feeling that's true.
Yeah.
Well, no, I have a feeling that's true because our generation, Dom, we are the first like latchkey kids, you know, and we're kind of, I don't want to say we're a forgotten generation, but we're an ignored generation. And, you know, but we don't care. And I think that's part of it. You know, it's like, yeah, you want to go run the country? Go ahead. We'll be sitting over here doing our thing and you go run the country. Go ahead. Have fun.
Yeah. You
go have fun, Andrew.
Yeah.
We'll be rooting for you. But we'll be over here, you know, playing on our computer and reading our books and raising our kids and doing everything else. You have fun.
Yeah, I mean, if most of our parents were at that tail end of the greatest generation, then that's how we were raised. We were raised to, you know, well, be independent, think for yourself, figure it out. You got a problem? Well, go figure it out. Don't whine and cry to me about it.
Right.
You know, and then whatever happened, the boomers raised a bunch of, stereotyping. I'm stereotyping, but
boomers are my parents.
Right. The boomers as a generation were, in many ways, I don't want to run any, like, I'm not saying this to run them down, but boomers and millennials, there's a lot alike in the things that you've experienced, the upheavals in society, in relating to generation skip. Like it's like it swings back and forth. I don't think, I'm not going to say Generation X is like the greatest generation. I mean, the greatest generation sort of stands alone. They fought the Nazis and ran them into the ground and lived through the Depression.
Survived the Depression.
Yeah. I mean, they are literally the greatest generation. And Gen X, we got our issues. You know, there's plenty wrong with our generation. But some of that 80s fashion notwithstanding. But you know, this generational, the identity is very interesting. This idea of how we think of ourselves as very distinct now. I think this is relatively new. I think maybe it started with boomers at some point, thinking, you know, that very, very distinct generational identity. And we've started to really think of ourselves as these cohorts of 20 years of birth, you know, when we were born. It's an interesting phenomenon. Essentially, what, you know, as Carl says, kids are kids. Kids are always going to be kids. They haven't changed. Essentially, you know, what we do to them changes. How we raise them maybe changes, but the kids are always going to be. They're young adults who are ready to be adults in many ways. Their body says they're adults. They want to be independent. They want to have a self identity. The question is, what do the adults? How do we help them with that? Are we Andrew, as you said, are we oppressing their souls, or are we lifting them up and helping them to find out who they really are and called to be? And I think that's, if anything, that's my takeaway from the movie. Any last thoughts on the movie and what we're talking about?
Well, I think, for me, there were two actors in that movie, Molly Ringwald and Anthony Michael Hall, who were actually high school age students in that movie. The others were older actors. Judd Nelson was 25 when he made that movie.
And he looked it.
And he did. He did. And Ali Sheedy was older too. So, it was for me though, I think, and even Emilio Estevez, he wasn't he was in his 20s too. So, it was interesting to see that those two actors that were kind of John Hughes staples, muses, if you will, they were kids that were kids, and I think that was interesting to me. I didn't know that at the time, but I, researching it and watching it again and looking at everything, it just, those two actors are of the Gen X generation. And I think, it was interesting to watch, through those eyes. And it was interesting to see them so young, because they were much older now. And, obviously they're our age. And,
much older now.
Anthony Michael Hall.
Thank you.
Anthony Michael Hall is, he went from like a gangly kid to,
my inspiration.
Yeah.
He went from the nerd to being like, first time I saw Anthony Michael Hall as like an adult in something like in the 2000s, I'm like, that is not the same guy.
I'm trying to think if I've ever seen either one of them in a role where they're an adult.
I think I remember seeing him. It was a show called The 4400. I think it was. I think he was
also in The Stand. Wasn't he in The Stand?
I think he was also in a version of The Stand.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
There's another show.
I'll have to go look him up as an older actor.
It's almost unrecognizable. Like, it's
handsome
amazing.
Dude.
Was that
handsome? He's a handsome guy.
Oh yeah, I mean buff and everything. I mean, just wow. It was just completely.
It just turned out completely different. Yeah.
Yeah. I read somewhere that John Hughes always cast him in the role that was closest to John Hughes's own childhood, his own persona in the movie.
That makes sense. And he's a fleshed out character. He's more fleshed out, I think, than some of the others. But yeah, it's interesting.
You could tell Hughes knew him.
Yeah, he knew him well. Yeah.
Well, he was in what, 3 or 4 Hughes movies.
Like
he was in a European. He was in a Vacation.
He was 16
National
Candles.
Lampoon.
This
16 Candles.
Not Ferris Bueller. I'm sorry.
Weird Science.
Weird
Science.
Weird Science. Yes.
Underrated movie, in my opinion.
And Christmas Vacation. And I think that's it.
He wasn't in Christmas Vacation. Leonard from Big Bang was in Christmas Vacation. He was in the first National Lampoon Vacation where they go to Disney World. That's not Disney World. It's
Wally World.
Wally Moose.
World.
Thank you.
Right.
Wally World's closed.
So it's at least 4, because he wasn't in Pretty in Pink.
No,
they brought John Cryer in for that one.
Right. So actually, I want to mention if you read Ready Player 2, the sequel to Ready Player 1, there's a huge section about John Hughes in there. There's a huge section about John Hughes and John Hughes movies.
Really?
The book isn't very good, but sadly, but it was very interesting reading it and thinking about that as I was watching this movie. But I want to give all other last thoughts. Andrew, any last thoughts on this movie?
All I'll say is I think this movie, with its all the 80s, stereotypes and cliches that I think we can still appreciate now. Obviously, it's a movie that I think a lot of people should watch and stands the test of time. Again, the deeper themes that I think, like you mentioned earlier, I don't think even the critics realized, it was aiming for at the time, about that we talked about throughout this podcast, about friendship, about education and parents, oppressing the soul and so on and so forth. I think, a lot of films really can't even aim to achieve what this film achieved and sort of bringing that out. And yeah, I hope that a lot more people discover it. I know it's a movie that is still popular and I hope that a lot of teenagers discover it and maybe and I'm sure they can relate to it. And it's freaking hilarious, especially watching it now.
We didn't mention all the hilarious bits,
yes.
But
yeah. Oh my gosh!
Hopefully they don't remake it.
Yeah, Don't remake it.
Yeah, this one, don't touch it, please. Yeah. Whatever studios out there trying to remake this, please just
leave it alone.
Yeah, leave it alone.
Shelly, I'll give you the last word.
Okay, well, I think this movie really resonates today still because it captures high school. And while the times may be different, the social media is a new way of communicating and bullying. It's all still a place where we're trying to find our identity and become who we are going to be. And what this shows is that if you give yourself a chance, you can learn to see you can learn to see beyond your stereotyped group and get a new perspective and see the human person that's in the people that are around you in the hallways or on your social media feed. And as we've been talking, those of us who work in youth ministry, we see these people even today. Maybe they're hyper amplified in this movie, but that's to make us look up and pay attention to them. And I know there was supposed to be a sequel, but it never happened because of the relationship between John Hughes and Judd Nelson. And they would never work together again. And I'm actually okay with there never being a sequel to this film.
Yeah.
No way you could live up.
Excellent. Good. Thank you for that. That's a great way to wrap it up. So as we finish up, I want to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the secrets of movies and TV shows, including David G., Rick A., Christina T., Dennis G., and Jeffrey F. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the secrets of movies and TV shows and all the shows at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. We want to hear from you. What do you think of The Breakfast Club? Are you Gen X? Was this your movie? Are you younger or older? What do you think? We want to hear from you. Let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/secrets or the StarQuest Facebook page, or send an email to secrets@sqpn.com. Until next time, Shelly Kelly, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of The Breakfast Club.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Andrew Hermiz, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Father Chip Hines, thank you as well.
Thank you for organizing it, as always.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the secrets of movies and TV shows on StarQuest.